feel like Kobe in the fourth quarter.
This is the Dane Moore NBA podcast, and we are brought to you by Prize Picks. Coming at you Tuesday morning. It's February 11th, and I will be joined shortly by Wolves beat writer Chris Hine from the Star Tribune, which is still owned by Glenn Taylor. The Minnesota Timberwolves, however, are not, and that is because on Monday evening, Mark Lowry and Alex Rodriguez announced that they won the arbitration ruling for ownership of the Minnesota Timberwolves and Lynx. The statement released by Lowry and Rodriguez read, Mark Lowry and Alex Rodriguez announced that the arbitration in the Minnesota Timberwolves and Lynx ownership dispute was decided in favor of Lowry and Rodriguez. The decision endorsed Lowry and Rodriguez's interpretation of the purchase agreement and confirmed that the contractually agreed timeline for Lowry and Rodriguez to obtain NBA approval and complete their acquisition of the teams has not expired. Glenn Taylor, in a statement of his own, announced that the three-member arbitration panel voted in favor of Lowry and Rodriguez, 2 votes to 1. Worth noting here, each side got to pick one of the arbitrators. So 2-1 kind of means the one person who was neutral there went to the Rodriguez and Lowry's side. Taylor also said in his statement, we will review the decision thoroughly prior to making any further comment. Timberwolves employees were addressed on a call by CEO Ethan Casson shortly after the news broke, and Taylor received his statement, and they were informed that change is to come. The arbitration panel voting in favor of Lowry and Rodriguez means their ownership group can now complete their final payment on the purchase of the franchise. They have $940 million in escrow ready to go, I've been told. Remember, they also have Michael Bloomberg and former Google CEO Eric Schmidt as part of their ownership group now. After that payment is completed, all that remains is approval from the NBA's Board of Governors, which I have been told is not an obstacle. Lowry and Rodriguez has already been approved by the Board of Governors as limited partners, making the vote for control with the Board of Governors just kind of more so a box that needs to be a final box that needs to be checked. There have been no specific dates set for, when that vote by the Board of Governors could happen. The next Board of Governors meeting is at the end of March, but it's possible, I've heard, that this could be processed earlier than that. All right. So what will this mean? What will change? I don't have all those answers for you. That's hard to divine exactly, right? But let's start with what we have. What we know is that the new group will be different than Glenn Taylor. And what we know about Glenn Taylor is that he's struggled to be as good of an owner as the other owners in this league, have. It's very hard to make a case that Taylor has been anything more than one of the worst owners, not only in the NBA, but in professional sports during his tenure. On that alone, I think it is logical to assume improvement is coming. But given how this purchase agreement was bizarrely sort of shaped and how Lowry and Rodriguez have been involved for, over 4 years, we kind of already have gotten some signals of how they plan to improve this team, this organization, in ways they already have. I mean, obviously, the overall success of a team since they've got here, that's a primary signal, but maybe some of that is happenstance. Maybe go, well, they drafted Anthony Edwards, they were going to be good regardless. Sure. You could make, some of that argument. I would point to the surrounding competent moves that have been made around Anthony Edwards and throughout the organization over these 4 years. Namely, I think the hiring of Tim Conley to run basketball operations is one signal of that competence and an example of Lowry and Rodriguez already improving this team when they were just minority owners. They were behind the recruitment of Tim Conley back 3 years ago. Remember, also, when Tim Conley was hired, he signed a 5-year contract with an opt-out clause after 2 years in it. In 2 years, the opt-out clause was in there because in 2 years, Lowry and Rodriguez were supposed to take over. That was about a year ago at this time. And when this whole process got, slowed down by this arbitration deal, Conley pushed his opt-out back 1 year, in an effort to wait for this ownership thing to be resolved in 12 more months once the arbitration piece was taken care of. And because the arbitration went in the way of Lori and Rodriguez, I think it's not only fair to assume that Tim Conley is not opting out this summer, but instead, very well could be receiving a contract extension. I mean, that's one. I think there's been many threads of competence, weaving in over these last few years as a product of some new ownership and some new leadership with within the organization. And again, that's hard to define exactly, but I would imagine it's true for those of you who are listening to this who have been, to Target Center at games in the last few years and were fans who went to games prior to that or a decade ago. I think even from just people who maybe don't live in Minnesota, haven't been to Target Center, but you follow the team closely, I think you've, even from afar, been able to feel the ways that this organization has begun to change and have some more competence to it over the past few years. It seemed, just like that this team has been ran more normally since Lori and Rodriguez have been involved. I do think we can all agree on that. I was thinking, being around the team as much as I am for this job, I was trying to think of a specific example of where I've seen this new ownership group doing things differently as a result of kind of seeing things differently than Glenn Taylor did, and trying to think of something other than just like vibes, and so I was sitting around as this news is coming out yesterday, and what I thought of, I'm not sure if this is a good story, but what I thought of was my first time going to cover a media availability at Target Center. Would have been either late 2017 or early 2018. I was just getting started in my career. It was my first time covering a media availability at Target Center, and because of that, I didn't know where to go. I didn't know which door I was supposed to come into. It was like 10 in the morning or something like that. It wasn't really clear where you're supposed to go. And I remember I came through this sort of garage area, which I learned was the wrong spot. The security guard told me, but I had my media pass. I said I was there to cover this. They let me through. And I don't know. I really remember walking. Probably I remember this well because it was my first time covering something. It was new for me. I was probably a little nervous, but I really do remember walking into this hallway. And I have you go past the security, and I walk in, and honest to God, my first thought was, like the back hallways. I'm like, oh my God, this is a dump. Like the entrance and hallway I was walking in, it was just the paneling and stuff was coming off the walls. The paint was chipped off in a bunch of different places, and it just, it looked worse than the Arena Bowl itself. And it was, I guess it's like a back hallway, so sure, maybe it hadn't got a ton of attention. But it was literally my first impression of Target Center coming into, the back hallways of it. And I remember like a year later, I'd gotten a full-time job. So I'm covering all these games. I was covering a game, and I somehow came down a different house, found myself back in the same like garage area, and the entrance into the dumpy hallway. And I realized when I was walking in, it's where the other team that the Wolves were playing that night, where they also enter. And I have this realization to myself. I'm like, oh yeah, like this is by the visitors locker room. This is where every player who walks into Target Center to play a game, it's where they come in first. And I'm like, this dumpy hallway that's clearly falling apart and has not been given any attention is opposing players' first impression of Target Center. I'm like, that's not good. At that time, the Wolves were really struggling to, acquire free agents or just have a perception of being, an attractive place to play. It was a pretty fitting representation in 2017 of what this team was. I mean, they hadn't made the playoffs in like 14 years. And, as we all know, they were kind of in the midst of that decade and a half sequence of just passing the baton from one organizational disaster to the next. They were still in 2017, right in the middle of that. They hadn't made the playoffs yet. Remember what that was like, and and the place where they worked and played looked like that of a team that was passing a baton from one organizational disaster to the next. It was bad in there. And I thought of this memory because a few years ago, I was reminded of it because of walking through that dumpy hallway, because a few years ago, one of the first times I personally ever met Mark Lowry and Alex Rodriguez in person was in that same back hallway. And, when we're exchanging pleasantries or whatever, while we're standing there, how bad and beaten up this back hallway we were standing in, it came up in the conversation, not from me. Rodriguez brought up, what it looked like back there. And he pointed to, he goes, isn't this where the players come in? This is by the visitors' locker room. He pointed to that same thought that I had about, this being the first impression of Target Center of other players. I said that to him. I was like, yeah, that was my first impression too, when I was in that hallway. That hallway has since been redone. The back hallways from that garage through the hallway that leads through to both locker rooms has been completely renovated. It's been repainted. There's different lighting. There's all these framed photos and fancy Minnesota written on the wall. And it just looks like what I've been to a lot of other stadiums and their back hallways. It now looks like what other stadiums look like outside of the locker rooms. I'm not saying it's anything spectacular. It's normal. It's just not, it's no longer bottom of the barrel. So that's what I'm getting at. What does this mean? I'm not sure exactly. Am I talking about them building a new stadium? Yeah. I mean, they're on the record saying that eventually they're going to build a new stadium, but that's not really my point. I think more importantly is, to me, that example shows like an awareness of perception. And I think that's probably important in ownership. I do think it matters to no longer, given where the Wolves are at now, it matters to no longer be perceived as a bottom of the barrel organization, because they're not a bottom of the barrel organization anymore. They went to the Western Conference Finals last season, and they're not a bottom of the barrel organization because they have Anthony Edwards on their team. That's just true. They should stop acting like it. And over the past couple of years, with some new added influence executed by the employees of the Timberwolves, they have made changes. I just think that energy of seeing things differently and acting on them is the thing that we will feel about the Wolves that will be different. Hallways or whatever. Like, maybe that's a dumb example, but throughout the organization, I think an ownership change will help the organization sort of shed this skin it has of, well, this is the way we've always done it. And that's just always sort of the sense that I've got. It's like a lot of the employees there are just kind of, hands are tied because their job is being told to just, well, this is the way we've always done it, so do it that way again. And I think in a competitive business like owning an NBA team, particularly in 2025, I just think that type of like apathy can be a killer. I think in many ways it has been a killer. I think in so many ways, the reason the Wolves have been as dysfunctional of an organization as they have been for the past 30 years is because of the way the place was run, and was because they kept that same energy of like, well, this is the way we've always done it, which cost the fans. It cost Minnesota overall. I mean, I don't know exactly what Mark Lowry and Alex Rodriguez will or will not do. It probably won't be perfect, but I do know that it will be different and that it will have more of a pulse to it. I don't see how any of us could see and feel that change and say that's anything but good news. So that's where we sit today, Tuesday morning, February 11th. Of course, much more to come as the final details of this click in, and we do start seeing change enacted. A press conference from Lowry and Rodriguez will happen at some point, and that's what we will begin learning what will be different. And the journey continues. However this thing twists and turns, I'm going to do my best to cover it over here. Before we bring Chris Hine in, a quick announcement, though. We are having a live event at Falling Knife Brewing Company on February 20th. That is the last day of All-Star break. It's next following Thursday. Britt Robson and I will be there. We'll do a happy hour at 6 p.m. when we kind of get set up and talk to those of you who are there, and then do a live show at 7 p.m. We haven't done one there, I think, since the beginning of the season. It was kind of a excitement of a new year, and I think I think it's sort of a fitting timing as the Wolves push for the end of this season, and into many ways a new era themselves. We're looking forward to getting together with those of you Wolves fans who come through to these. We'll meet you in person. We'll take your questions while we're doing the live show, and we'll just look forward to hanging out. That's Falling Knife Brewing Company, February 20th, 6 p.m. I'll be there a little bit before that, but we'll kind of do happy hour 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. and we'll do a live show 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. and hang out a little bit after that. So if next Thursday you're looking for something to do before the Wolves start up the post All-Star break portion of their season on Friday the 21st, come to Falling Knife, 6 p.m. February 20th. That's Falling Knife Brewing Company in Northeast Minneapolis. All right, let's talk some basketball with Chris Hine from the Minnesota Star Tribune.
Hey, yeah.
All right, we are now joined by Wolves beat writer Chris Hine to discuss the real news from yesterday. The Wolves getting blown out in Cleveland on Monday night, 128-107. Chris, how are you?
I'm good, Dane. I think that was the only thing going on last night. I don't know what you're talking about. But, that was the only thing on my radar.
You were just locked in on Wolves.
I was locked in on the game. I was so amped to see what was going to happen. It was like I had blinders on. It was nothing else was happening last night.
We will talk with Chris a little bit about what comes next with the ownership stuff at the end here, but I do want to talk about the game some, because I do think there's only so much we can't do with the ownership stuff at this moment. So they do play a very good Cleveland team. Last night they play without Julius Randle, they play without Dante DiVincenzo, and they play without Mike Conley, and it was an awful offensive start. I mean, the worst. I don't know. I literally, if you
21
look it up,
years. Yeah.
It was over 13 to start the game. They were down 16-0, or did they get to over 16?
Over 6. They got to over 16. Yeah. It was the worst start by a team since 2004.
I mean, this isn't like a new thought. I mean, there's been a lot of games this season where the Wolves have just been completely offensive power outage. And we've talked about it here. What do you make of it?
Usually that got blamed on Julius Randle, but they don't have him to blame for that last night. I don't know. Just maybe it's just one of those nights. I mean, they've been playing better of late. I honestly kind of I don't want to say I want to punt on analyzing the game last night, but sometimes in the course of an NBA season, you just have one of those nights, and I think they've been playing better of late, and it was just one of those nights where everything just went wrong. Like it was like the young guys didn't play well. They're cold from the outside to start. Naz Reid cools off from 3-point range, and coming off of missing a game starts slow, which probably is to be expected. Sometimes with him when he's coming back from an injury that he might start the next game a little sluggish. He got it going eventually. But he needed a game to ramp back up after that illness. That game against Sacramento wasn't his best, and then it just didn't. Missing shots, and then you start to force shots, and before you know it, you're 2 for 20 in the first quarter against the best team in the Eastern Conference, and you're digging yourself out of the hole all night, and you never get back.
See, I'd be way more willing to play the just one of those nights cards if it was just one night, man.
Yeah, that's true.
I hear what you're saying, and like Nas has been hot and he didn't make some shot, like all of those things, but this is these type of starts specifically on the offensive side of the floor, and the inability to find an offensive rhythm over like a 7-8 minute period isn't new to this team, and that's not normal in the NBA. Like this is not. This seems to me to be a feature, not a bug to this Wolves team, and I'm not sure why it is. Like, what are the reasons that make this happen? I think at times, and maybe in ways last night, you could point to Finch? What can you go to, that's going to get you something here to get yourself started? I think you could also point to some youth just from,
Sure.
Ant being your number one player, being 23, and sometimes it's taking him a moment to process what's going on there, or maybe a moment even in his own head, just based kind of on, is he locked in at the beginning of the game? I just kind of do think that type of start is pretty inexcusable, because it didn't look like, when I was watching the game, that it was just missing shots. It was like not even finding ways to begin getting shots, and they were, how many of them were just like air balls or end of the shot clock?
Yeah, they were bad. They didn't even come close. You're right. Yeah.
Right. There's just like no direction. And I'm sitting there last night, I was sending you the email, like, what are we going to talk about? Why are we going to talk about it? And you look at the box score at the end of the game, and you go, okay, they needed more out of Naz Reid and Nickeil Alexander-Walker. And I think the Naz one is related to the beginning of the game, because they started guarding Naz. They came out, Donovan Mitchell's guarding him. And they were just, kind of willing to guard Naz like he was a guard and not be really afraid of what he could do on the interior. And it wasn't, I think it was maybe their second basket of the game. They finally found Naz in the interior. Rudy's guy, Allen or Mobley, who was ever out there at the time, came over and double teamed, and Naz dropped it off to Rudy, and Rudy got a dunk right underneath the basket. And to me, that's a good example of this team being slow to recognize what they need to do in this situation. Donovan Mitchell, 6'4", if that. Naz Reid, 6'10". How can you not put yourself in a position to find a bucket through this mismatch there? Why did you need to wait, 8 minutes to do it? And I do think there's blame to be spread there. And then just, overall in the night, I think they needed more out of Naz Reid and Nickeil Alexander-Walker in a game that they didn't have Julius Randle and Mike Conley. But I don't know. Maybe Naz wasn't ready to be a primary focus of it. Maybe he did expect to be guarded by Donovan Mitchell and needing to play that way. But I think the Wolves needed to do and should have done something more at the beginning of that game to exploit what Cleveland was doing, and instead just kind of went, I don't know. Yeah.
Well, listen, they sometimes, like you said, they're slow to adjust. Maybe Ant is slow reading a game at the start, and Naz is starting now. He's not coming off the bench in that way, so he's facing starting units. He's not mixing in with another team's bench, which is a big advantage for the Wolves. When he's able to do that. So you come out and maybe Cleveland deviates from the game plan that they had the last time a little bit. You're like, oh shoot, well, we were expecting this, so what do we do now? There's maybe a little bit of shock that sets in. You don't quite know how to handle it, and before you know it, you're 0 for 10, and then you're pressing, and it just kind of snowballs a little bit from there. And I still don't know. I'm just, given the events of the day,
that opinion.
Given the events of the day, I think it was just one of those nights, Dane. I really do. I maybe it was just me and like being buried in ownership stuff while I'm trying to watch this game or whatever. And they're on the road against the best team in the East. They've had a good stretch. They had a nice win Saturday. Ant's coming back from injury. There's still 3 guys down. I'm sorry. I'm just willing to write this off as just one of those nights. I really am.
Hey man, I think that's fair. I think it's also fair for me to highlight the other side.
I think so too. I absolutely think so too. I'm giving them a pass tonight. They're done with Cleveland. Cleveland has just killed them twice now. They're done with Cleveland for the season. You don't have to worry about this team again until the finals. It's not like you have to worry about a playoff matchup against these guys coming up.
Good point.
They're done with Cleveland. They come home for 2 games, reset. Maybe Mike's back, maybe not. Maybe that's part of the problem, Mike not being there to maybe recognize things or move chess pieces around the board early in a game.
Remember,
as well.
He missed the Portland games, and there was no Mike, and those were other really rough starts. I'm not trying to make that take wrong, because I do think that there's plenty of that to be mixed into what it was yesterday. I think personally, I think it was both. And I do think if this team is trying to get to where it says it wants to go, from Finch to the players to all that, like, it's not that you need to beat Cleveland.
Right.
To me, it's you need to exercise these demons that come up specifically related to the offense, where I don't. It doesn't not compute to me that a team with Anthony Edwards on it should be this poor offensively. A team with Rudy Gobert, who's been a part of very, very good offenses in his Utah days, just that
But
had its buttons to be able to push.
think about the circumstances leading into the game. Ant is coming off of missing a game, which we know traditionally tends to throw him off his rhythm at least a little bit when he's coming back from it, right? Rudy is going up against Evan Mobley in the front court of Evan Mobley and Jared Allen, potentially the best front court in the NBA if you want to, get into the weeds of it, right? So bad matchup, right? No Mike Conley out there. It's a weird day. Maybe everybody's checking their phones on the ownership news. I don't know if the players are tuned into that or not. Usually they don't really care about that stuff. But maybe because yesterday was such an extraordinary day, maybe people were talking about it before the game. Maybe there's a little bit of distraction going on in the air, right? You talk about it all the time with Rudy about what's a good matchup for Rudy and what's a bad matchup for Rudy. I don't think there's any worse matchup for Rudy than the Cleveland Cavaliers. So that to me is to be expected. I think that's talking about. If we're talking about kind of what is a good matchup for 32-year-old Rudy Gobert versus what is a bad matchup, this is basically the worst matchup possible. I would.
It reminded me of, remember that first Spurs game against Wemby? It was after the Nuggets back-to-back, and the Wolves got killed in that game, and we kind of pointed after the fact to that game of being like, oh, it was back-to-back, and it was a really bad one. But I would add this game in there along with the previous Cavs game of against teams that are as big as the Wolves are or bigger than them, like the Spurs can't be, like the Cavs can't be. I do think they have a susceptibility against these type of teams that can kind of both close out their offense in ways and also punish them on the other side of the floor. I think when we look back at it and when we're doing like the playoff preview of whoever they're playing, and if it is whatever a team with a really strong front court, I would go, the Wolves have Rudy Gobert, but Rudy Gobert has been more impactful against other types of front courts. But broadly speaking, I get what you're saying, and I think we can flush a lot of this. I did just because I had it in here and I have in the needed more from Naz, needed more from Nikhil. I didn't totally go through this, but I remember last season whenever Nikhil started, he was like awesome and elevated kind of to another level.
Yeah.
Does it feel like to you that the offense has kind of struggled in the games when Nikhil's had to start at point this season?
Yeah, and those were very few times last year where he had to start, right? Like they were kind of spot starts here. That Boston game. Like Mike didn't miss a ton of time last year. The lineup as a whole, the starting lineup as a whole was relatively healthy last year. So there just wasn't, I don't want to say it was a small sample size, but you're right in the sense that it didn't feel like it was as much of a slog offensively when Nikhil started. But and this just goes in line with what we've seen of him, if he has to take that burden on, although he took it on pretty well on Saturday when they needed a lift against Portland. I thought he played a really good game there. But it's just inconsistent, that role for him, while he can do it on some nights, it's inconsistent, and playmaking and putting pressure on himself to run the offense. It just sometimes it's just not the strongest attributes of his game. And he presses, and then sometimes, that might lead to getting in his head a little bit and whatnot. Not to be unexpected. And I was looking up some Nikhil stats last night, trying to see if there's any correlation between like Dante going out and maybe some of the struggles he's had of late. I don't think that perfectly lines up with Nikhil's season. Some of the whether it's the shooting struggles or turnovers, whatnot, I don't think you can just point to that. But It's just natural to come down from the hot start that he had too, a little bit as well. And as we saw Saturday, he's still capable of being a difference maker and having some really really good games. It's just when you ask him to do too much,
Absolutely.
we keep assembling this body of work that, while it's not impossible, it's a risky proposition and a risky thing to ask him to do on a regular basis.
I do think you're right in saying, though, that it's been better. And citing Saturday as an example, in the beginning of the season, it was kind of like, whoa, can they play Nikhil at point guard at all? You know, they're doing the ball pressure was getting to him. I didn't like go into the game yesterday being like, oh, you know, Nikhil's starting at point guard. The offense is probably going to struggle massively from it, because it isn't even, you know, it's ants out there with him too. It's not like exclusively Nikhil's job to get them into offense. But I did just like want to note that down there, because I mean, Nikhil was a team worst minus 33 in 26 minutes. I don't see what his shooting line was here. You know, he's 0 for 4 from 3. Just had 6 points. You could see him visibly frustrated out there. Obviously, a good, impactful piece for this team. But you know, we're just kind of, as the Wolves are in the midst of their first couple of weeks of injury, you know, that they've had all season. These are just kind of some of the lumps that they have to take as they're kind of figuring out what we do when Conley's out, when DiVincenzo's out, when Randall, and when a tandem of them are out, because you know how these positions sort of slide around. So I hear what you're saying. I think it certainly was a weird day. But they needed more from their offense. And when I watching that game, I was writing down needing more from Naz, given how Cleveland was guarding him. And then with Nikhil, it's clear that he individually just had a rough night overall, and they couldn't afford that against, like you called them, you know, well, it is the best team in the Eastern Conference, one of the best teams in the NBA. Let me grab our first break here. Today's show is brought to you by Adriana Lonick at Coldwell Banker Realty. She is a realtor that is licensed in both Minnesota and Wisconsin. And as we always tell you, you know, if you are in that process of wanting to buy or sell a home, you need that realtor. You need somebody in your corner to help you kind of figure out how this works. So the first step with that is setting up a free consultation with her to understand what your needs are, your desires are, and what your abilities are as a purchaser or seller. And that consultation is free. With Adriana, you can set that up at the dancingrealtor.com or by calling or texting her at 715-304-9920. But if you book one of those free strategy sessions, you will be entered to win some lower level Wolves tickets. Again, her name's Adriana Lonick. She's with Coldwell Banker Realty, Minnesota and Wisconsin licensed realtor. Her website, just for all the contact information, is thedancingrealtor.com. You can call her, text her at 715-304-9920. Like I said, mention this podcast and be entered to win a pair of free Wolves tickets when you sign up for that free consultation. Today's show is also brought to you by Prize Picks. I was poking around on here this morning. We're running out of football.
I was going to say we're out of football now. So does Prize Picks just shut down for the year, or what? What's going on?
Well, technically this is a basketball podcast,
right,
contrary to most people's belief. But go ahead. What were you going to say?
People bet on basketball? What? Never.
Apparently, it's a daily fantasy lineup that you can put together. I did want to just say, it's like, it is, if you do know you have one of those nights and you're like, I am going to watch the NBA tonight, and kind of pick out what game you're on. You're going to watch the Joel Embiid, the Sixers and Raptors tonight. Be like, okay, I like Embiid in this matchup, and putting together some different lineups. I mean, I think the cool thing about it is it doesn't have to exclusively be basketball. It doesn't all have to come from one game. You can put together these lineups more or less on any stat, and the more pieces, picks you have in your lineup, the greater your earning potential is on there. Like we say all the time, you know, play for $5. It's just a fun thing to be able to do. And, you know, maybe when it isn't your primary team, the Wolves aren't playing tonight, right? So maybe you can, it gives you a little something else to have going there. But it's really, you have $5 on the game, and if you have you put together a lineup, maybe you can win $20-25. This isn't meant to break the bank, but it is a fun thing to be able to do. It's daily fantasy. It's prizepicks.com. It's the Prize Picks app. They have a lot of promotions related to the NBA going on, free squares. They had all these Luka Doncic prize props kind of going on last night. Look for that, as you know, they're trying to capture some of the NBA audience right now. PrizePicks.com, PrizePicks app. One promo you can always use the promo code Dane, and you'll be credited with $50 in your account when you make your first $5 lineup, $50 in promo funds to your account. Chris, I do think a certain positive from last night, and an extension of what is becoming a pretty incredible stretch, is Anthony Edwards' play. He had 49 3 games ago, 41 2 games ago, and 44 last night. He is beginning to be a lot more coverage proof, I think. He has more solutions to finding his offense, even through whatever opponents are throwing at him. He's found ways to find Rudy, to get off the ball, to do things to kind of loosen the defense enough to get the ball back and be able to score. And if you're a team like Cleveland that doesn't have a strong perimeter ball containment guy, I don't know, man. I'm going into like all those games now thinking like this is 35 plus for Ant. And recently he's really shown that he has this gear. What was that, 134 points over his last 3 games? What?
Ridiculous.
Yeah, I don't have a lot of like in-depth questions. Just be like, pretty good, right?
Hey, it's pretty good, huh?
Yeah.
Well, you know, we heard Finch a few games ago talk about just the quick decision making, which I don't think was present earlier in the season, and especially through the month of December when he struggled. You know, it seemed like he was just trying to take his time more to read defenses. Now it feels like he's just going. And it's more of almost like a Naz Reid mentality when he's out there, because whatever Naz does, he does it quick usually, right? And that's how he's meshed so well, I think, with Finch's offense over the years. And I think Ant has adopted more of that mentality now, where whatever he does, he's going to do it quickly. Is he going to go to the step back? Is he going to take it to the hoop? Is he going to give it up, look to get it back, move off the ball a little bit? Like, it's all kind of coming together, I think, in that way of just quick decision making. Don't fret about the double teams as much. You know, you can still get your shots. You'll still get the ball back, you know, whether you're creating for your teammates or not. I think Finch, I did listen to his post-game comments. He did mention wanting a little more playmaking out of Ant last night, maybe. And who knows if that was just a product of the way the game was going, Ant feeling like he needed to shoot them out of their early slump. You know, who knows? He kind of did.
But I hear that.
I think generally speaking, it's the quick decision making. I also think their ability and their willingness to crash the offensive glass of late has maybe helped. I haven't gone a super deep dive into.
Oh, but when Ant misses a layup, Rudy feels like he's getting the offensive rebound and dunking it. Often,
yeah.
Right? Yeah,
or just whatever other scoring opportunities are generated for Ant off of second chance points. You know, whether it be threes coming off of an offensive rebound or easier driving lanes. Like I would be curious to know, and maybe go down that path of like the Wolves' uptick in offensive rebounding, and they're 4th in offensive rebounding rate since January 1st. How much this has also affected Ant's uptick in offensive production, and how much of their second chance points on a nightly basis are driven or created by Ant. I mean, just anecdotally, I would think a pretty decent amount, but you know, I don't have the numbers on that to back it up. But I don't think that's. I think those two things can go hand in hand a little bit for sure.
I think I can remember 2 of his made threes last night came off of a long rebound. One I can remember, Nikhil getting a long rebound like at the free throw line immediately, then kicking it to Ant, who's basically just open for a catch and shoot 3. You know, like we talk about the importance of getting Ant a lane against a shifted defense. You know, the second side, they can't load up. The ball's moved back to him. Now he's just got one guy to beat against a shifted defense. Well, that's basically the setting an offensive rebound puts you in always, right? The defense is turning and trying to man up, right? And they're not set like when you're walking walking the ball up the floor, and they're not in their coverage. I do think that would make sense that Ant would profit off of that if he's somebody who's at times hindered by teams loading up against him. It's certainly the offensive rebounding. There's absolutely a through line. I went through this last week of the offensive rebounding uptick correlating with the Wolves' offense overall upticking. And I think that's an encouraging sign, regardless of last night. Offensive rebounding was actually good last night, I think.
It was. They still had 14 second chance points last night, which is a good amount. Yeah.
I think Rudy's getting a great feel for like playing off of the, these Ant kind of kamikaze drives to the basket, and kind of reading offensive rebounds to finish there. I think the interesting part for this to me, Chris, of Ant 134 points over the last 3 games and scoring well over 30 for the past month now, is he's not shooting well at the rim. No. Like that, which makes me think there's like another level to this that could come, right? I mean, part of it is, okay, you look at his shooting numbers from 2-point range, they're not that good. But when you get to the free throw line, that doesn't count as a shot. You're not credited in your shooting stats. In these 3 games that he has 134 points, he's taken 18 free throws, 15 free throws, and 13 free throws. That's just a big part
That's a huge part of this. Yeah, it's way up from earlier in the season. His free throw rate has skyrocketed over the last month and a half. And that's a credit to him being able to put his body on the line, and sometimes it results in a sore hip that causes him to miss the game. But I think to your point about finishing around the rim, I think he's just anticipating the contact, and he's kind of my dad. We used to have a player. I'm going back to my dad's high school coaching days here, so forgive me here. Drink on the podcast if you are listening to me talk about my dad's high school coaching days. But we used to have a player on the team. His name was Kyle Flemings, and he was our leading scorer. He was a sophomore when I was a senior. And my dad always had a saying in practice with Kyle: shoot it, don't throw it. Because Kyle would get around the rim or start driving to the basket, and he would just kind of put it up, right, and hope for contact. And my dad would always tell him, shoot it, don't throw it. And I think about that sometimes when Ant is driving. I'm like, shoot it, don't throw it. Because it seems like sometimes he's just throwing it up there. And all these years later, by the way, Kyle, whenever I talk to Kyle and see Kyle, he always says, shoot it, don't throw it. Like it's been ingrained in his head. It's been ingrained in his head for 20 years. But I think sometimes that happens with Ant, where it's just he's bracing for the contact and he just throws it up there. He doesn't shoot it.
Dude, right? I think he's throwing his body and the ball. You know what I'm saying? It's like he's trying to, and okay, so it's Cleveland, right? And you're trying to get through Evan Mobley and Jared Allen there, which Ant is a physical force enough to be able to do, but like to kind of power through that and get to the rim, he is throwing his body explosively to the rim to be able to, try and finish it. It does seem like there is just some chaos to when he is going to the basket. And I think it was after the Saturday's game, Finch was talking about, I think he was asked about the, some of Ant's stuff around the basket. And he's like, I would like to see him get the contact and then kind of react off of that, draw the foul and then go to it. Whereas Ant just sometimes seems to be bullying his way all the way to the rim. And then he's by the rim, and it's a little bit of a chaotic, layup that bounces off the backboard and comes off of the front rim. There's it's obviously not that Ant doesn't have touch, but I think what you're saying is finish with touch,
Yes.
And that, which is this, absolutely, this is us nitpicking here to be clear, but I just find it astounding to have watched these 3 games, have those numbers be as good as they are, relatively as efficient as they are, and thinking in my head of literally 20 shots at the basket that I know he's capable of making, and didn't. I'm not saying that 45 turns into 60 or whatever necessarily, but I think there's room here for Ant to be even better, in in the process to which he's generating his offense. And if I'm another team coming up, I'm scared of that,
Yeah, no, it's because that is like the final boss level, right? Of where his game is at right now. As you were talking, a interview that I did for the book just flashed in my mind. I don't even think I included this in the book, but it's something that stood out to me when I interviewed one of his college assistant coaches. I think it was Chad Dollar from his time at Georgia. And he said that it took them a while to get Ant to use the backboard on when he would go to the rim. Right. And so now I'm thinking like, man, if we can go back through Ant's misses, how many times is he trying to, instead of use the backboard on a layup, lay it, like finger roll, lay it in? Is that maybe contributing to some of this as well? So I don't know. I just thought of that.
I think that's really interesting, dude. Because yes, what we're talking about is finishing with touch through chaos. Like, it's hard to go through chaos and then to precisely lay it in at the basket rather than, getting all the way to the backboard and putting it up off the backboard. Like, your speed isn't as important in that spot. It's like just hitting a spot on the backboard. We should ask Ant about that.
We should. And
I don't know. He might take offense to that in some sort of way.
I don't think like if we got to, like, you could ask him a question. It's like, when you get to the rim, are you trying to lay it in? Or are you trying to use the backboard? Like, what are you, kind of what's your thought process? He would answer that question. But I just thought back to that interview. I'm like, when he was at Georgia, they had to, like, essentially, I think it was like, using the backboard is for like old men or something like that, was like his reaction or something like that. So they had to, like, tell him, no, man, like, it's using the backboard not for old men, because all those years later, when Ant was suddenly in love with using the backboard on his mid-range jumpers, like that same assistant was like, it's hilarious to me now watching him shoot mid-range jumpers and using the backboard, because we had to try to coach him to use the backboard on layups way back when. So I think that made its way into the book. But I'm thinking about that a little bit now as we talk about his proficiency around the rim, and it's like, he always had just a natural disinclination to want to use the backboard, as if laying it in without using the backboard was more manly or something like that. I don't
know. I think we're in the midst of, like we were last season after Cat got hurt, just kind of in one of those Ant special moments, extended moments of time here where he's just going, and as a student of Ant's game yourself, I mean, what do you kind of make of these just spots of time where he just elevates himself to another level, when obviously, we're watching every game, and there's these other times that we can think of where, it's an extended stretch of time where he's just not really there. He isn't finding his effectiveness. I just find it to be I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, I find it to be interesting that Ant has this ability for like a couple weeks at a time to be so much better than like his mean. Do you know what I'm saying? It has these, like, and it's not just one game. They're like these pockets of like 9 games or whatever, where it is just a whole nother level. Not to say the mean is bad, because the mean is an all NBA player, right? But he's starting to have highs that rival the Jokic's, the Sheas, the Tatums, the Lukas. Maybe that's just what all it is. It's just interesting something about him that I don't really know what to call it, I guess.
I don't know why it happens specifically. And I think you were on with Kyle the other day, and he brought up the point that, we expect these leaps from Ant year to year, and it seems like the leaps happen in the season. Instead of like at the beginning of the season, right? Like the leap happens halfway through the season, and that's when you get Ant going to another level. I thought that was a very good point, because that's how it's happened these last 3 years. Carl goes out 2 years ago and is gone for 50 games. That was a leap. Last year, Carl goes out again. That was another leap later in the season, leading into the playoffs, right?
Literally a leap right into the rim in Indiana, where he blocked the shot, and then the next night leaped over John Collins.
And then John Collins a few nights later, exactly. That led right into the playoffs and his performance in the playoffs. And last year or this year, Julius goes down. Team's battling a number of injuries, in and out, guys in and out of the lineup. Season could be teetering, and he takes it upon himself to up his game again in the month of January after complaining about all the double teams he was receiving. That ever since that moment, it's been seemingly, I don't want to say smooth sailing for him, but he comes out the next game, scores 53 in a loss in Detroit, and it's like, oh yeah, but maybe he rediscovered a little bit of himself in that game, even though it was a loss, right? It's like, yeah, I can do this. Like, yeah, that was just a bunch of complaining the other night. Like, I can master this league. I got this. And so I think maybe there was a little bit of that at that time, and ever since then it's been one great game after another. And yeah, I don't know why it comes in season, but it just has.
The thing we know about Anthony Edwards, and we learned this, back when he was 21 in his first playoffs, is like he does have an ability to click into another gear that is a significantly higher level, and it often is when the stakes are highest or when the need is greatest. And sometimes I think people are like, oh, I can't play hard or play your best all the time. I think there is something about like Ant's wiring that I don't know if he needs the spark to get him going or whatever it might be, but there are different levels to Anthony Edwards. And I think the difference between 21 and 23 now is the average is a very, very high average. But I do think it's encouraging that there are still, amidst the high average, these extra gears that he can go to when a Dylan Brooks pokes him, when he's playing against somebody that's extra important for him to beat. Again, I know some of that stuff might be a little bit annoying to be like, oh, why do you need this? But if the average is the average and these things kind of come off of that average, I think it's extremely encouraging and something that a superstar does.
I think to your point, and I flash back to another interview that I did for the book. He thrives best when there's urgency in the moment. I think that's definitely true. Whether it's team urgency, individual urgency, like you said, maybe a matchup that he's particularly amped up for. And I remember talking to his business manager Justin Holland. We were talking about the Olympics. This is in the book, about later in the Olympics, and basically Justin told him, or he told Justin, like, oh, LeBron and Steph, they're not going to let us lose. Basically like, they're not going to let us lose the gold medal, and Justin knew, like, from knowing Ant for over a decade, that Ant was going to play like crap the rest of the Olympics. After he said that. And essentially that's what happened. Like, I don't know if you remember, I think it was the game against Jokic and Serbia. Ant did not play well in that game. And I think that was the game before, like, he made that comment right before that game. And Justin was like, I kind of knew he was going to be in the tank at that moment once he said that, because he wasn't taking it upon himself. And he was like, oh, well, we got LeBron, we got Steph. Right. I don't have to do too much, and then he didn't play his best game. So I wonder if he looks around when he sees an injured Timberwolves team and is like, oh, well, Julius isn't here. Oh, well, Dante's not here. Oh, well, Mike's not here. I got to do this myself. Like, I really need to show up here. Right. As opposed to maybe having a fully healthy team where he's like, oh, well, Julius can take some of the load, or Naz will come off the bench and he'll
going for 60 against the Hornets.
Cat's going for 60 against the Hornets, right? So I wonder if there's just a little bit of, when guys aren't available, that he can point to and be like, oh, well, Cat can take it tonight, or Julius can take it tonight. Like, if there's just a little bit in him that's like, oh, if I don't do it, then nobody will, and we won't win. So maybe there's a little bit of that going on.
And I think whatever that is a feature, not a bug, too. I think, or at least at 23, in his early 20s. I don't have a name for that, but whatever that is, that's a really good anecdote from Justin. I do think that's a feature, not a bug, of who Ant is now. And I think largely a good thing, stepping up in the big.
Absolutely. The big and that's why I think we've seen him rise to the occasion in the playoffs for the last couple of seasons, or basically the entirety of his playoff career. He's really never had a bad series, except for maybe the Western Conference Finals last year. But he has always risen to the moment, the urgency of the moment, what is required of the moment, generally speaking. And if they've lost a playoff series, it hasn't been because of him, usually. Yeah. So it's, yeah, I think that, like you said, that's a feature of Anthony Edwards, that when he senses the moment, when he needs something, when he needs to hit an extra gear in a certain moment, he's usually able to find it.
Let's move over to ownership stuff. And at the beginning of the episode, I just kind of laid out what happened yesterday and kind of looked backwards, right? It's crazy. I'm sure you were doing this yesterday too, just kind of thinking about how crazy this whole adventure has been and how long it has been, and you
4
think
years.
back, yeah, it was funny.
I feel like, what's her name on the Titanic? It's been 4 years now. For 4 years.
It was funny. I was going to my phone and I was looking up what the first time I had Mark Laurie on the show is in Vegas, and it was back in July of 2022. Is also there was that like picture of you and I at that Timberwolves party thing. We're on that like floating Timberwolves rock, and it's me and you. That was the picture. The picture right next to it. That was back in 2022, man. Like, and we were already in the middle of like ARod.
That was year 2.
Coming. Yes,
yeah,
that was
year
a
2.
long time ago.
2021. I did a profile of Mark Laurie at Summer League 2021. Like, looking back at that was the first profile I did of him with the magic tricks and all that
magic
stuff.
Tricks. Yeah. Oh my god, I forgot about the magic tricks. You told that story. So it's just it's been a lot going back, and where I'm just at personally is it's like, okay, and you guys writing about it too, it's like, you need to go back to look at what the story was, but I'm really interested about these these next steps. What's next? What happens once we start hearing from Mark Laurie and Alex Rodriguez and the organizationally, this, like, I mean, the question I sent you is just like, what are you looking for in your coverage as a reporter to, I mean, uncover makes it sound like it's like some mystery, but you know what I'm saying? Right. Of like, what are the next things you're trying to find out to tell the story of the Timberwolves ownership, and the shift that's coming?
Well, when you think about what it takes to compete in the NBA, what it takes to keep a superstar in a market like Minnesota, it's, to me, the number one question is, you're going to have to be in the luxury tax. How long are you willing to be in it and sustain that status in the NBA, knowing that Anthony Edwards is going to want to be on competing teams year in and year out?
Yeah.
How much are you willing to really step up and pay in that scenario? Because we've never experienced this in Wolves history, really, where you're going to have to be one of these teams that is paying the luxury tax to stay competitive. And so what is the desire? What is the appetite to be that kind of team, especially if you've got an impending arena thing coming on board in the next 7 to 10 years or however long that process may take. So that, to me, is the number one question, at least as it relates to the on-court product that you will see every night.
No, I think it opens up an interesting thing, like league wide. I mean, your Boston Celtics, I'll call them. I thought that was very interesting, and is interesting, how their ownership group is moved to sell, the Celtics themselves. And I think just from talking, to some people about just like the luxury tax and second apron and stuff in general, somebody put it to me like, well, now if you're an owner of a team and you're a good team, you're likely paying the luxury tax, which means you are very likely taking an annual loss just as an organization, right? The Wolves are going to pay, 85 million just in luxury tax penalties this season. It's extremely difficult to make $85 million in profit in a season, even if you like win the championship, you know? And so it's, again, the person I was talking to kind of like said these entities owning the team kind of are shifting from yearly profit generating entities into something that is just a growing in valuation. And
Yeah.
and it's important because of that to have ownership that is flush in cash so as to be able to fund these things externally in the process while the valuation of, you know, the team increases, kind of offsetting what your costs are. Now, I think in this situation, specific to Mark Lore and Alex Rodriguez, their investment has already doubled, you know, in many ways, if we believe the, you know, Forbes $3 billion
Right.
valuation of what this is. So there's like a little bit to play with there, but you do need to have cash on hand to be able to fund a team that, you know, is trying to go win championships and has a star player like Anthony Edwards. You don't just need the star player or players, an elite roster and elite, all those things. You need to be able to fund this in ways that even 5 years ago, 10 years ago, organizations didn't have to do. This is I think we're just going through a time where there's a shift in overall the way teams need to be owned and managed. And I think, yeah, it's a great point, and it's important that the ownership group is that way. Mark Lore and Alex Rodriguez have said that, you know, stated that on the record repeatedly, the willingness to pay for a winner. Finch said in his pregame press conference yesterday that he has confidence that, you know, that, to be fair, both ownership groups showed a willingness for that. But I think you're totally right. It's the biggest thing with ownership. Are you willing to compete and spend with the other teams that are out there willing to compete and spend?
Now, to be sure, like every team is trying to duck under the second apron. This does not make the Wolves unique that we're seeing them try to chart a course here over the last year to get under the second apron. The entire league is doing this or trying to do this. Basically, everybody does not want to be living the second apron life. So when you see the Wolves making like potentially a cost-cutting move like trading Towns, I think, you know, the immediate knee-jerk reaction was always ownership's trying to save money. Ownership's trying to save money. Well, so was the rest of the league. Like that did not make, you know, and Glenn Taylor was the owner. That did not make anybody not unique from where the rest of the league is trying to get to in this second apron world. Nobody wants to be there for more than a season right now because it's too punitive. So, but you will have to stay between the first and second aprons, or at least paying some sort of tax to stay competitive and to keep this roster competitive. You know, we're talking about how can they stay under the second apron, re-signing Naz, re-signing NAW, Julius Opson, all these things. All these things still have them paying the luxury tax. It's just not over the second apron. So keep that in mind. And the other thing that, you know, a veteran NBA reporter always likes to say, not every owner is Steve Ballmer. Not every owner has more money than God, right?
Yep.
Not every owner can just write a blank check every year, regardless of what the luxury tax bill is. It's just even for as much money as they have, we're talking about over nearly $100 million. And if you keep going down the line, annually, right? So that's a lot of money. Like after 4 or 5 years, when you're looking at your books and you're looking at like, shit, I might be paying $500 million in just in luxury tax. That doesn't even count the salaries, like just in luxury tax, you know. So, you know, sometimes owners balk at that, right? You just got to keep that in mind. And that's why I think that is the biggest question facing the new regime, just from an on-court perspective. Just what is the appetite? And part of that is going to be cause and effect, right? It's going to be like, well, if we have a contending team, all right, you know, show us that you can be contenders before we invest in it. If you know, I don't know that going forward, like if after next year, you know, for instance, this is just me talking, I don't have any inside info on this, but if you go through maybe a 2-year window here where you're just out in the first round, you're languishing around the 6th seed, you know, what is that appetite going to be moving forward? But if you make another push deep into the playoffs, that increases maybe ownership's willingness and desire to keep pushing the chips in, right? So some of that is based on how the team performs as well.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting is it's like, yes, a team that has shown a lower ceiling, there's logic behind spending less luxury tax. There's also, if you're a team that showed less ceiling, there's a logic behind getting below the second apron so as to have more roster building mechanisms,
Yes.
getting young players, cheaper players, acquiring like not having your draft picks frozen, those sort of things that are penalties from being over the second apron of the luxury tax. So there is actually incentive in ways if you are one of those teams to not spend. And even at the deadline, I mean, how many teams do you see Shams reports this trade and then, that it's quote tweeted 6 minutes later with now so-and-so is below the first apron, or now so-and-so is by trading Daniel Tice's 2.1 is out of the luxury tax. That's just part of saving money. It also has direct ties to roster construction growth, which, to the Steve Ballmer point, what did they do this offseason? They let Paul George walk.
Yeah.
That's Steve Ballmer.
He started saving money this year. Yeah.
Because it was saving money, but it was also going to give the Clippers a greater optionality of who and what they can be, going forward, and not being locked into like maxes from Harden, Kawhi, and Paul George, who are all in their mid-30s, right? There just is, it's just, we're entering a different, ownership landscape. And I think, number one, willingness to spend, but also an ability to be smart about the way that you spend. And sometimes that is where new owner syndrome starts coming in. And, you like, nobody can rip on Matt Ishbia for not spending. It's maybe not spending in the right way, but this isn't just like a Yankees thing where you're like, or Yankees when we were kids, or Dodgers now. I don't follow baseball anymore, but like where it's just like, oh, we just have this competitive advantage because
the Yankees win 4 World Series and they sign Jason Giambi. That's your 25-year-old baseball reference that you're getting here. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I've seen Moneyball. Yeah. It's
exactly.
I do really think that this is going to be like a very interesting thing to cover because it is on like the cutting edge of a change in the league. The Wolves will specifically have new ownerships, will be facing these these propositions, and we work in a space where we get to interview the players all the time, more than we even need to, probably. You don't get that with the owners, and I think it's going to be very, telling and informative when we have an introductory press conference for this ownership group, whenever that happens, and interview to like what they say they're going to do are going to be big clues of what is actually going to happen because, they're the head of the snake. It is their willingness and their ability to operate financially responsibly and just like logically responsibly is going to be a big determination. I think a lot of people are excited about the ownership change, but there's work for this group to do too, to not, it's not just in and of itself 1000% a win that Glenn is out. It's what are you going to do with this opportunity as new owners to be better than the previous owners were, and what are you going to do specifically in this in this financial landscape of the NBA to be as good as you can be when you have a superstar player in Anthony Edwards on your team. This is an interesting story.
Yeah. This is for me the number one thing. I know fans are paranoid. The Minnesota sports paranoid fandom was creeping in immediately afterwards. The strip comments are all full of, well, now they can move the team to Vegas, and I'm like, did we really go back to 4 years ago, 2021? Are we really still there? Yeah. That they're afraid they're going to move the team to Las Vegas? Like we're just still doing this in the year 2025. And so
that's why it's important for those readers to have been reading your coverage for the past 4 years, because you would have reported that is nowhere near the fear that, and I mean,
Yeah.
to be fair, in 2021, when I saw that Alex Rodriguez,
We all thought it at the
I was
time.
like,
Yes, we all thought it at the time. Absolutely, 100%.
no,
But then when you start actually looking into the logistics of how that would actually work and the NBA's appetite for making that work, it's like, oh yeah, they don't want to move from like one of the 15 biggest markets in the country. Like the NBA doesn't want that, So that started coming out, but but the year to year willingness to spend and compete is the biggest question for me. That is 100%, because I think it just, people don't realize just what that takes financially to make work, especially as the numbers keep going up and up and up. Whether even in spite of the franchise valuation doubling in the last 5 years, just the amount of cash that you need to spend year to year. We look at Denver. Just look at the appetite there to try to walk this line of having a generational player winning a title, but not necessarily
being frugal,
but being frugal in the process, and it's cost them players. It's cost them Bruce Brown. It's cost them KCP. Hell, it even cost them Tim Connolly, right?
Sure.
Like at the end of the day, like that's an example of where you could end up. And listen, they're still the number 3 seed in the West, but if they had a blank check ownership situation where you could just say, all right, blank check the next 3 years, we're going to try to build a dynasty around Nikola Jokic. How different does Denver look in that situation?
It's a great example of why this is important. Yeah. And if you're going to be privately funding a stadium, building it yourself, that's a whole nother level of cash. I mean, they are going to, in many ways, need as much money as God. And I don't know, like, they do have Eric Schmidt, the former CEO of Google, as part of their group. They do have Michael Bloomberg as part of their group. I like both Lori and his companies have had recent success, and same with Rodriguez. I don't get any signal. We're not sitting here being like, hey, I don't know if they're going to have enough money to do it. What we're saying is they are just going to need to spend a lot, like contextualizing that it could be.
That is either money you spend or don't spend. That is like basically you're locked into all these contracts, and you kind of know you know year to year that you're going to have to pay the salary cap or thereabouts. But anything you spend above it is discretionary. What you think you can spend to win,
right, man? Yeah,
it's not the cost of doing it. That's more than the cost of doing business, right? Yeah, that's more than the cost of doing business. So it really is, and that's priority number one when we are able to ask some questions in a press conference or an interview setting coming up.
Chris will be all over that whenever those press conferences, do arise. You can obviously be following all of his coverage on the Wolves on a day-to-day basis as the beat writer. But Chris, along with the other beat reporters, have done a really good job of writing this story over the course of 4. I mean, how many Timberwolves ownership stories do you think you have written in the 4 years that are related to like Glenn, Mark, Alex, something related? I mean, it's got to be over 50.
Yeah. Oh, I would say 50 is probably a good estimate. I would say every year we probably have written around maybe 8 to 10, right? Just whether it be even small things like the NBA approved the latest purchase, or Glenn Taylor or Mark Lowry and Alex Rodriguez notified Glenn Taylor of their intent to exercise the next option.
Sure.
Like even just the small updates in this process, you're probably about right. Yeah, probably about 50. Yeah.
That's so much
something
writing.
like that. I know.
Well, seriously, Wolves fans are lucky to have you, and I know this isn't a perfect or ideal situation for you and your job and all of that too. But I've really, I just would say to listeners, I've been around Chris in the entirety of this process, and he's handled this extremely professionally. And you do great work, not just covering the team, but covering these topics, which really those are different skill sets, and you've spread your wings plenty in this. So seriously, good job,
Thank
and
you.
to listeners.
And it's something that I've always tried to keep in mind working for the newspaper that Glenn owns, and I've tried to cover this story, especially over the last year since it blew up, as if I didn't work for Glenn's newspaper. And that's the approach I've always tried to take. And hopefully people can see that in my coverage. I can't speak for anybody else, any columnists, whatever they write or whatever, but in my coverage, I've always tried to handle this as if I wasn't working for the newspaper that Glenn owns. And, I hope that was one reason why Mark and Alex actually sat down with me last year or did an interview with me, because they saw that in my coverage. So hopefully the readers see that as well.
Mm-hmm. No, I've read it all. I read all 50, I'm sure. Really exhilarating.
Right.
Just kidding. You do a great job. Newsletter comes out today, right?
Comes out today. Yes. Well, basically the last thing on my mind today, but yes, the newsletter comes out today. So subscribe to that.
That is free through the Star Tribune as well. Obviously, we recommend you get a subscription to read all of Chris's work. But if you want to try it out, it's easy to you can Google it. It's on Chris's Twitter. It's all over the place. Basically, if you go to any Star Tribune Wolves article, you'll be prompted to enter your email address and then get these newsletters that are really, it's a lot. There's a lot in there. It's not just like 200 words of Chris being like, this happened today. It's he puts a lot into it. And so I would really recommend that if maybe you aren't a subscriber to the Star Tribune, you've gotten to know Chris through this show. You're great on the show, but you're a better writer. So I would recommend people checking that out.
Appreciate it. This edition, all basketball. I wrote it before the ownership situation came down because I wanted to just get it out of the way because I knew yesterday was going to be crazy. So no ownership stuff for the newsletter. Be sure to check Star Tribune for our coverage of that throughout the day today. But the newsletter is going to be all basketball-y today. So yeah.
Love it. He's Chris Hine. You follow him on Twitter at Christopher Hine. You can follow him on Blue Sky as well. I guess we probably next week's All-Star break, right?
Yep.
So
2 weeks.
2 weeks from now, we'll have Chris back. Maybe we'll have more of a owner. I would assume to some extent we'll have some more ownership clarity by then. But Chris, we appreciate you doing it. Love your work. And again, you guys can follow Chris on Twitter at Christopher Hine until Thursday when Britt and I record after the Milwaukee game. He's Chris. I'm Dane. Peace out.
How I'm feeling, man, I hope it never stop, yeah. Green and hot so you can find me in the crowd, yeah. Don't let standards ever bring you down, yeah.